Hey everybody, I'm John Greengo, and I know you guys had a lot of questions about the Canon 7D Mark II, and I wanted to run through some of your questions and see if I can get you some good solid answers on them. So let's start off, and we had a lot of people. One of our most popular questions was, I have a 7D, should I upgrade to the 7D Mark II? And kind of, what's the criteria for doing that? Well, I own the 7D, and I own the 7D Mark II. I just went out and bought it, so I have had a chance to shoot with both of them and compare them. The 7D Mark II is clearly a better camera. Is it worth the upgrade? I guess it depends on two things. Number one, are you satisfied with what you're getting with the 7D? And do you have the money to upgrade? Because right now, the downside is that the Canon 7D has plummeted in its used value. So you're not going to get very much for your camera. I don't know what the current value is, but I knew that I wasn't getting more than about $400 or $500 for a used 7D, and I've decided to just keep it because it was a good solid camera. It's been shooting very well, and it's kind of nice to have two cameras to shoot with. And so I'm keeping my old 7D around because I think it's still a good value. This is a better camera, and if you got $2,000 or whatever it's running nowadays, burning in your pocket and you want a little bit better camera, then yes, this is a better camera. And so the big issue is, has the 7D been performing well for you? If you are getting more than 80% of your photos in sharp focus, properly exposed, you probably don't need to upgrade. And I hate to be the ones to tell you you don't need to upgrade, but it is a nicer, a little bit better camera with lots of nice extra little features. 8 to 10 frames a second, not that big a deal. 18 to 65 points focusing, it sounds huge, but it's not that huge, at least for the type of work that I've been doing. And so they're both still solid cameras. This one is just a little bit better. All right, next question. Daniel Mogg, does the 7D have a built-in Wi-Fi to transfer images on the go? No, it doesn't. It's got a little GPS unit up here and no Wi-Fi, so it doesn't have that. Next question. Let's see, L. Grundy, can you set it up so stills go to the CF card and video goes to the SD cards? That's another simple one. No, it doesn't. Actually, Nikon cameras allow you to separate the video and the JPEGs. You can separate images onto different cards, but it's more along the lines of RAW and JPEG on those cards, and so you can't do that on this camera. Next up, Dale Wooten asks, when taking pictures of motion such as fireworks and streaking taillights, headlight pictures, what is the difference between using long exposure, bulb, and the camera intervalometer? Okay, so we got three different things. First off, let's separate camera intervalometer. You probably don't want camera intervalometer for any of those types of things because the intervalometer will take a photograph, wait a while, take another photograph, and then take another photograph after a little while. And so that's more for creating a short time-lapse video. So that's probably not what you want. The difference between long exposure and bulb is that in long exposure, you are selecting ahead of time how long that exposure is going to be. So you might choose 5 seconds or 15 or 30 seconds. In the bulb mode, there is a special bulb mode on the camera. There are two options. One mode is that you can set it up to be a very specific amount of time, longer than 30 seconds. Well, I guess longer than 1 second. 1 second or longer is the correct terminology, I guess I'm looking for. So if you want to set it to 3 seconds, you can set the bulb mode to 3 seconds. You can set it to 3 minutes. You can also hook up a cable release. Now this is where it starts acting on a different system, and it's as long as you leave your finger down on the button. So one of the techniques that works very well for fireworks photography is using the bulb mode and a cable release, because then you can start the shutter, and then when you see that there's enough action, you can release off of it. You're not trying to guess it ahead of time. If you know exactly how long it's going to be, then it's good just to set that particular time. For instance, if you're doing a star shot and you know you need 30 seconds of exposure to let the right amount of lens light into the camera, then setting it to 30 seconds would be the best choice. But if it's some sort of more random act like fireworks or a car driving down the street, you might be better off in a manual bulb mode where you can turn the camera off at any time. So hopefully that answers your question about those different types of shots. All right, next question. James Lauder. There is a focus lock button on the back of the camera, a little star asterisk shape. Is this very useful, and when is it best used? So the little star button on the back of the camera technically is the auto exposure lock, not the auto focus lock button, but it is a customizable button that you can reprogram to be an autofocus lock button. And then it depends on how you shoot. Personally, I don't ever use this, but the way that you could use it is if you have your camera in AI servo, which is the continuous focusing system. So when you press down on the shutter release, the camera continually focuses on your subject. And let's say you're photographing football players running up and down the field. And then you want to go over and you want to shoot a picture of the coach, but you want to kind of do a locked off shot on them. You focus on the coach, you press in on the asterisk button, that locks your focusing. So now you can recompose the shot and the camera's not trying to refocus because you're pressing in and you've locked the focus in. And so that system that they describe would be very good when you predominantly want to be in a continuous focusing mode, but you want to be able to have a single button to lock that focus in when you want to do a shot of a subject that is stationary and perhaps off-center of where your focusing points are. So it's a very valuable way of, or it's a very valuable tool to have for one way of doing that. There are a number of different ways that you can set up the focusing that, of course, if you see the full class, I go into all the details about how to set up all the custom modes because you can select different buttons to do different focusing things. And it's pretty amazing at how much you can customize the camera. All right, let's see, the next question is from James Lauder. Oh, same James. Hi, John. My biggest concern is tack sharp focusing. There are maybe many focusing tracking modes. How can I find the best one for my situation? Yes, there are lots and lots of options on this camera, and in general, we should all be thankful. That's a good thing, so that we can tweak the camera to our own settings, but it is a bit of a burden because there's a lot of things to tweak and figure out. And so I would say, start with the camera right out of the box, and see if it works for you. Try it out and different things that you do. Now, the thing that is going to be a little bit frustrating, if you shoot a wide variety of things, if you're shooting skateboarders at one moment and ice skaters the next, they are both moving, but they're doing their movement in different ways. So the more you work with a subject, you might try simple little changes. For instance, in my class, we talk about the intelligent tracking mode, and that is something that may or may not work for the types of photography that you are doing. So try shooting for that for 20 minutes and then turn it off. And then you're going to have to go back and look at your photos and see how they work. You may even have to take an athlete out on the field and say, run up and down this field a few times. I want to check out how this focusing system works with the lens that I use, where I like to shoot, and the time of day that I like to shoot. And so it's going to have to be a little bit of testing and practicing, but that's how you get good at anything, is by practicing with it and fine-tuning it. And so I don't have a quick short answer for that, but that's what I would do, and that is what I do with the camera. Next question. Sherry Burns, how does it compare to Mark III in image quality? And I'm going to assume they're talking about the Canon 5D Mark III. Well, this is a cropped frame sensor versus a full frame sensor, so it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, but it's obvious why you're making the comparison because they are similar cameras that you might want to go to. In image quality, it's not quite as good, and it's because the sensor sizes or the individual pixel sizes are not as large. It's not as good under low light conditions. And so if you are going to be shooting at ISO 6400, I think the 5D Mark III is cleaner. Having said that, this camera has better performance. I prefer the menu system and all the options in this camera. The only thing I don't like is because they have so many more options in the menu system, it's actually a little bit smaller in font size. And so because they've had so many new items in there, so it's a little bit harder to read, but when it comes to the image quality, it is more than good enough for most of the photos that we take. I think sometimes, and we all are guilty of this at time to time, being over pixel peepers in what we're doing. And you have to figure out what you're doing with your images, and does this camera meet those needs? And I think for most people, this is going to more than fit the needs of what they're doing, with the exception of somebody who is, for instance, doing star photography at night. That's where a Canon 5D Mark III is going to be much better. Or anytime you're shooting under really low light conditions where you're using higher ISOs. At the lower ISOs, the image quality difference between a 20 and a 22 megapixel camera is insignificant. And so if you're shooting at ISOs 100 to 400, next to no difference at all. All right, let's go to our last question from Javier Zegra. What is the new anti-flicker mode? So the new anti-flicker mode, and this is the first camera to have it, it's a mode where the camera can automatically detect the flicker that is common in many different types of lighting in arenas and gymnasiums. What happens with the type of lighting in there is it's not a smooth lighting. It actually has peaks and valleys in its brightness. This camera can sense when there is a flicker and it can warn you. That's one thing. The second thing is it can time the shots according to the peak values of the light, so that when you shoot, and you could be shooting at up to 9 frames a second with this camera in that flicker mode, and it's automatically just tweaking the timing of each shot by the thousandth of a second so that it hits on the peak of when that light is flickering back and forth. Now the camera can focus or can shoot at 10 frames a second, but when you put it in the flicker mode, it's likely to drop down a little bit below it, for instance, to 9 frames per second. So some great questions. Thanks a lot, everybody. If you would like to know more about this camera, I do have a 5-hour, maybe it's a 6-hour class. It's a long class called the Canon 7D Mark II Fast Start. It's from CreativeLive. And if you want to know more about the camera, pretty much everything you're going to want to know about this is in that class, because I go through every button, every menu item, and I give you recommendations how to set up the entire camera. Thanks a lot, and hopefully answered the first of your questions.